get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
Well, hey there, Lions fans. Welcome to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast and the 2025 NFL playoff campaign. Vince Progard, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by the man who you can't say the name Philadelphia without saying the name Phil Byrne. Phil, how you doing, buddy? Welcome aboard to the playoffs.
Yeah, and I don't know Big Dom, the sideline guru of the Philadelphia Eagles or anything like that. You know, no, I don't know.
That's a disappointment.
Yeah, I know. I don't know where we're going with that, but yeah, hey, it's playoff season. We are in rare air, of course, getting that number 1 seed. We didn't play this last weekend.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of other teams did. We'll kind of recap that and kind of set the scene, I guess, heading into now Saturday night's big showdown against the old commies themselves, the Washington Commanders.
No doubt about it. So you brought it up, Phil. This is rarefied air that we're in because we've experienced many, many wild card weekends over the years where the Lions did not participate. But the difference is that they already had their lockers cleaned out and the players had all gone their separate ways by then. Now we are squarely in the mix as far as the playoffs go, but with no game. How did you spend your wild card weekend? What was your kind of overall thought? Did you enjoy the games, or were you not even paying attention, or what was kind of the way you spent your wild card weekend?
Yeah, no, I mean, I watched the games, but what happened to our NFC North brethren? I mean, first of all, it's the whole catch-22 about trying to root for a team that you don't like. So, of course, I was naturally rooting for the Packers versus the Eagles because I was like, oh, well, you know, like, I would rather face the Packers, even if it was the Packers a third time.
And get the Eagles out of there altogether and take your chances.
And they couldn't get out of their own way. Again, I think Matt LaFleur and Jordan Love are pretty good. You know, I think they're in the top half of quarterback and coach combinations in the NFL, but they did not have a ton of receivers to throw to. And they just looked like they were simply outclassed. It really was not much of a game. Flash forward to Monday night, and you know what? The idea of the Lions basically putting their opponents down for the count when you face the Detroit Lions continued down to the postseason. Minnesota looked absolutely dead as well. There was one good game, in my opinion, and that was between the Tampa Bay Bucks and the Washington Commanders. And then everything else was basically garbage. It really wasn't that good. It was kind of reminiscent of what we've seen in the college football playoffs. And it's almost kind of like, is college and pros getting to the point where we have like 4 or 5 elite teams and everything else is just kind of, they're okay. Maybe not good. They're okay. And everyone else is just the 4 teams are elite. And that's kind of how, you know, we got it going. But I think the games were a little bit of a mixed bag. I really don't think they were that great over Wild Card weekend.
Yeah, so AFC, in case you've been living out from under a rock the last few days, AFC chalk. The Texans over the Chargers. Ravens made pretty easy work of the Steelers. It was all Buffalo over the Broncos. We got a little bit of sex appeal with some of the NFC stuff to an extent, especially if your rooting interest was the Commanders to upset the Buccaneers. Then you got a little bit of what you wanted there. Green Bay didn't really hold much of a fight against the Eagles. And boy, oh boy, it was all Rams over the Vikings. Phil, just because of a recency standpoint here, in the game that we saw on Monday Night Football where the Vikings looked absolutely lifeless out there in the desert against the Rams, who, of course, based on everything that's going on out in California, the Arizona Cardinals opened up their home to the Rams and said, hey, go ahead and play your game here, and that's what they did. Nice, classy move by the Cardinals organization. But, Phil, I'll cut right to the chase here. Do you think that the Detroit Lions, what they did about 10 days ago on Sunday Night Football, the last game of the regular season, do you think they broke the Minnesota Vikings?
I don't know if they broke the Vikings. I can tell you right now, they broke Sam Darnold. He had absolutely no confidence out there again for the second week in a row. The offensive line protection was atrocious. And I will credit the Los Angeles Rams. They may not have Aaron Donald. They had a heck of a pass rush going, getting in and really, really disrupting Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold again with Justin Jefferson really not able to get in any sort of rhythm at all. And what's so weird about all of this, look at the Viking schedule. They lost to the Lions, they lost to the Rams. They went on that win streak, then they lost to the Lions, and they lost to the Rams. So there's something that we and the Rams are collectively able to do from a defensive standpoint. Even though that one game in Minnesota, Darnold still had a pretty good game, that was enough to disrupt him and kind of show that shell of, New York Jets Sam Darnold, sans that one Matt Patricia game, that we had, his first game of his career. So he's in a weird spot. I really don't know what you do with him at this point because you don't want to franchise him and give a guy that maybe isn't worth all his weight that huge amount of 1 year's worth of salary.
Yeah, because that's the
You,
other side of the coin on these franchise tags is you're still
yeah,
paying the player a lot of money. And for
yeah,
a guy where you don't know if he is in the process of turning into a pumpkin right before our eyes, that's a
yeah.
big commitment to make for an uncertainty. Obviously, we're going to need to wait on some of the medicals for J.J. McCarthy. Daniel Jones is still in the quarterback room, as we mentioned last week. So a lot of different options are in play with where the Vikings go from here because – like we kind of hinted at would be the case if they lost, they are the only team in NFL history to have 14 wins to go on the road as a wild card team and get bounced out wild card weekend. So a lot changed from that 24-hour period between when the Vikings knocked off the Packers to when the Lions took the field against the 49ers on Monday Night Football, and the Vikings were in the graphic as the number one seed, and everyone was taking the screenshots and all of this, and a lot has changed since then.
A lot has changed. And think about Sam Darnold. He was the absolute hero in that locker room as of, beating the Green Bay Packers and Kevin O'Connell and just like what a scene that was. And 2 games after the fact, um, more question marks probably than any other team, with the direction, the implications. It's the quarterback position. You really don't know. So um, that is the end of the Vikings for the season. They have to live with the record they have. And again, it's just this franchise that when push comes to shove, they can't get things done, and that's their MO. And that's something that is really, really strange. That has always been a bugaboo with that franchise. So, yeah, that's the end of the Vikings.
Yep. So we're not obviously a Vikings podcast, but I at least wanted to bring that up and kind of put them to bed before we started moving on to more
Yeah,
relevant topics here. So the game, because we saw the Packers get knocked off by the Eagles first, so we knew that if we wanted to avoid either the Vikings or the Rams, we had to be pulling for the Commanders in the Sunday night game. And by all accounts, that was a pretty back and forth, entertaining
yeah,
game. If you didn't have a dog in the fight and you were just sitting back and watching two teams fighting for their playoff lives, that was probably the best game out of the entire weekend, the super mega wild card weekend or whatever the NFL brands it as these days. But it wound up being a case where the Commanders forced a timely turnover at the end and were able to get some points on the board, and they were able to get the ball back and run the clock all the way down and play for a walk-off field goal. And it took a little bit of love from the right side goalpost, something that you see every now and again. The doinking in. Obviously you got the Cody Parkey. Phil, you're playing with your hair, kind of like Zane Gonzalez was
yeah,
there, and showing some of his quirkiness as he gets ready for a kick. But you remember Cody Parkey a few years ago, the doink did not work out for him very well in the playoffs. Zane
yeah.
Gonzalez got the opposite, and it's the Commanders that are going to be coming to town as the 6th seed in the NFC. It was going to be more than likely a Saturday game. I kind of did the math. Unless they got one of the Monday night teams, I figured it'd probably wind up being a Saturday game. That's exactly what it is. 8 o'clock on Fox. The Commanders at the Lions. So, Phil, before we get too geeky and X's and O's on this, I just kind of want to take your temperature a little bit and gauge what your thoughts overall on this matchup are. Are you happy with the fact the Lions drew the Commanders? Do you wish maybe they would have gotten the Vikings or the Rams instead? Or what do you, obviously, I think the Packers probably would have been the best overall
Yeah.
solution for all of us. But since we knew ahead of time that wasn't going to be an option, having been the first one to lose, just kind of want to take your temperature on your thoughts on this matchup.
Well, it is difficult playing a team a third time. So I guess in hindsight, maybe it's good that even though those two teams, the Vikings and the Packers, are they look basically dead in those matchups. That we're still not going to be playing them. It is a fresh matchup. Credit Dan Quinn for what he's been able to do and kind of get this turned around. I think it is so easy to give all the attention to Jaden Daniels, and he's an awesome, awesome player for this franchise for the Commanders. But Dan Quinn's done a remarkable job, right? So I think they are going to come into this game and just be a difficult matchup in the regard of they know what they're walking into and they're playing with house money at this point, right? I think just even coming in as a 6 seed, they had a lot of wins in the regular season, but I don't think at the beginning of the year with a rookie quarterback, with a first year head coach, that they probably envisioned even best case scenario that they would be in this situation among the NFC's final four teams. But here they are. That's going to make them a little bit dangerous, and that's something that maybe we weren't preparing for as the 1 seed. So again, that's kind of like the focus meter. The Lions aren't going to overlook anyone. That's not their MO, and that's not what they're about. But it is a little bit more difficult, I guess, in the fact that we haven't faced this team yet. They have a little bit of an unknown factor in some regard, and I think they are kind of playing with house money.
That is kind of the scary thing about it, Phil, is you've got a team in the Washington Commanders, probably more so than any other team still alive in this year's playoffs.
Yeah.
The most dangerous scenarios to walk into is a team with absolutely nothing to lose. And I think, as I said, you can say that applies to the Commanders more than just about any other team still alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, I think it is going to come down to, okay, who's going to get off to the hot start? How is the game going to go? I think all things considered, and again, I don't want to perceive this as I'm overlooking this team because I've seen what Jaden Daniels is capable of. I've seen what Terry McLaurin is capable of. Brian Robinson Jr. is an awesome young running back. They have a lot of things that if you are a Commanders fan, you absolutely have to feel excited about. And even just excited about that they are here, but they're going to be a dangerous team. They really, really are. But there should be a certain point with the pieces that we have returning, kind of as we get into the X and O's piece of this, that you're expecting as a Lions fan, like, okay, that's cute. Reminder, we are the number 1 seed, and we're going to shove the ball down your throat, and we're going to play some smash mouth football. Welcome to Ford Field. Welcome to big boy football. Welcome to the second round of the playoffs, right? So what point of the game is that going to take over? And the Lions can just kind of assert their dominance. We'll see.
So let's look at this from a mindset, mental standpoint. So we knew that the Lions needed this number one overall seed probably more than any other team in recent memory because of the fact they were so injury ridden over the course of the season. They needed that bye week just to get guys healthy more than anything else. And obviously the home field advantage comes as an added perk. This team going 8-0 on the road obviously has proven that they're able to win a game against any team anywhere, and that's kind of the mindset that the Commanders have. We'll play you anywhere, anytime, and we'll probably try and go in there and beat your ass. But I want to know from a mental standpoint, Phil, if you see any type of truth to the first-round bye hangover since the NFL revised the playoff process, and instead of having 2 teams from each conference get first round buys. Now you're only having one. You're having an extra team as a wild card. So now you're getting more action on wild card weekend. Only one team from each conference gets that first round bye. Since they changed to this current format, number 1 seeds are 11-7 in that first game back. So you could argue that the first round bye hangover is a thing. Only one other time in the current format have 2 number 1 seeds gone on to face each other in the Super Bowl. So it's far from a guarantee that just because you got that first round bye, you got that number 1 seed, you're playing games at home, that, no pun intended, the number 1 seed is going to be able to get home and make it to the Super Bowl. So I want to know from you, Phil, is this anything that you're concerned about, that the Lions, coming off that first round bye, are going to be going up against a team that just had a game, were able to go through the motions and get up for a playoff game and win a playoff game and be able to ride some type of recent confidence? Because it will have been almost 2 weeks since the Lions last experience playing any type of football, much less getting any good feelings after a win.
So, okay, I'll say this. I think, first of all, we had a lot of starters not play in the preseason. And getting into week 1, you saw we were a little sluggish against the Rams. We were a little sluggish against the Bucs to kind of get things going. That's more of the hangover kind of that I'm seeing at this point. I think by this point in the season, we are so dialed in for where we're at. It's really just, what are our snap counts going to be when we're getting a couple guys back a little bit? As far as the bye and the schedule and stuff like that, when we're looking at it, the Lions, we know what the Lions' journey was, right? We scratched, we clawed, we fought our way to get that number 1 seed. I know the Vikings and Packers aren't here at this round anymore; they bowed out, but it was a battle with them to get here. I think in the past, a lot of times these 1 seeds, maybe they had a little bit of an easier division to get through. They clinched a little bit earlier from their division, and they just kind of stacked some wins upon each other, right? So there's a lot of different kind of analysis and kind of historical look backs and things like that. I truly do not believe, with this game being on a Saturday, with this team being fired up, with it being in prime time, and Jared Goff, since he's been the Lions quarterback, his record in prime time, that they're going to come out sluggish. Doesn't mean everything is going to be 5 straight touchdowns to open this game. That's not what I'm expecting, right? I expect Washington in this first quarter to try to set some sort of tone and kind of get the Lions everything they've got to make this a game early on. But I'm not expecting this team, even with that 1 week layoff, to be sluggish at all, because, again, in week 18, we still were going toe to toe with the Vikings, right? So I'm expecting a solid fight from the Lions to get this game going.
Yeah, because that's going to be crucial to not give the Commanders, again, the team that is coming off a playoff win, has nothing to lose. They're playing with house money all the way, to get a couple of 3-and-outs by the Lions offense, boom, boom, to start the game, just because the Lions are still trying to shake a little bit of rust off, just because they're a little bit out of their routine. I mean, it's been since week 5 that they haven't had any time off of any kind. So they are a little bit out of routine, good, bad, or otherwise. So it's going to be really key that the coaches, from a mental standpoint, really keep these players locked in. And I don't think motivation is ever really a concern with this team, but I just get a little bit concerned just based on history. And again, it's not apples to apples, because it's other teams, it's other franchises, it's other groups of players. So it is not apples to apples necessarily, but that's the one thing that has me a little concerned, is just the potential to come out a little flat just because they were sitting at home while the other team was playing. We kind of saw the same thing. You brought up the college football playoff a little bit earlier in the show, Phil. We saw that every team that had that first round bye in the football playoff lost. The team that had just played came in there and pulled off the seed line upset. Now, you could argue that there was a little bit of inequality in how those teams were seeded and who got the
Yeah.
buys with
Yeah.
ASU and with Boise State and all this getting the first round buys. You can dispute the seed line pairings and assignments and all this other stuff, but that's just the one thing that concerns me is the potential to come out a little bit more flat than the Commanders. Now, here's the next thing that has me a little concerned here, and I think this is a situation that always comes up, and that's how you're going to deal with a mobile quarterback. And we've
Yeah.
seen Josh Allen come into Ford Field a little over a month ago, and it did not go well. The scoreboard will tell you something different, but if you look into that game with context, the Lions were never really in that game, especially from a defensive standpoint. You look back a season ago, Lamar Jackson was never a game. And those are just a couple of examples. The Lions have traditionally struggled in recent years against teams with the mobile quarterback. And Jaden Daniels, even though he's a rookie, again, this time of year, I hate calling rookies because they've got eight full games under his belt by now. What's going to be Aaron Glenn's approach to containing Jaden Daniels in this playoff game? We kind of saw that he drew up something a little bit special just for Sam Darnold in the Week 18 game, and it worked. You can't use the same approach because Darnold and Daniels are two completely different quarterbacks. Yeah. So there's going to have to be a completely new game plan on defense drawn up. What do you think that defensive game plan is going to entail?
Well, I think Jaden Daniels can run, and he is a willing runner. But I think in this game, I would still imagine he's probably going to want to establish more of a passing game. And to me, I think their passing game is all about Terry McLaurin. I think he is so much better than the other receivers that they have out there. They really don't have much else outside of Terry McLaurin. Yes, they have.
What about Olamide Zaccheaus?
Zucchini? What? No, but and listen, Zach Ertz. I mean, if this was 5 years ago, I'd probably be a little bit more concerned. To me, it's all about stopping Terry McLaurin, not allowing him to get open. I think you can do some things with some zone coverages to kind of limit him a little bit, maybe bring a safety over top to go ahead and help. Ultimately, I think it's going to come down to the safeties and what you do with them and get them involved, disrupt some of the passing lanes. And even if you cannot get to Jaden Daniels from a rush standpoint, I think it is all about trying to cut off the passing lanes, have a guy like Zadarius Smith try to tip a couple passes at the line of scrimmage, and get Jaden Daniels off his flow, get the Ford Field crowd rocking and rolling, and making life difficult that way. Because I think they're going to try to run the ball with Brian Robinson Jr. instead of really just kind of letting Jaden Daniels just, okay, hey, no one open, going to go scramble for 15 yards, I think that's a little bit more of Josh Allen's game, I think, than Jaden Daniels at this point. But I think if you slow down Terry McLaurin, I think you're going to find some success in slowing down Jaden Daniels. Now, the Bucs secondary, they did not do a good job with that. And, I was thinking they had a couple guys returning. Jamel Dean got beat a couple times going back to that wild card game. And I just didn't think they schemed up a very good defense against the Commanders. So,
and the Bucs also have had a lot of injuries on the back end of their defense, kind of like the Lions. So that's almost kind of like a preview of, hey, if guys aren't following the game plan to the T, this is what could happen.
Exactly. So it's all about the safeties and trying to cut down the passing lanes, in my opinion.
See, I think it's going to come down to something a little bit different because Terry McLaurin is the best in the NFL when it comes to contested catches. More often than not, somehow, whether he's open or not, Scary Terry is going to come down with that football. So I almost think it's better to almost bow up a little heavier against the run, force Washington to become one-dimensional, knowing that McLaurin's going to get his, by hell or high water, he's going to find a way to go up and get that pass from whoever happens to be defending him in that current moment. You let him get his, and hey, you think Washington wants to, you said, dish it off to Brian Robinson and start playing man ball against the Lions? Okay, take that away from him. You want Daniels to be a little bit more loosey goosey outside the pocket? Don't let him get free. If you force him to step back and be a pocket passer, I think that helps the Lions a little bit. I don't know if that's going to be the recipe for success, but I think that's at least something to maybe look into and see if they can maybe take Daniels out of what he's used to
Mm-hmm.
and to see what happens. But either way, it's going to be interesting to see what Aaron Glenn comes up with, especially because he didn't know what he was going to be getting until Sunday night, and then had to get right on that marker board right around the stroke of midnight on Monday.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's a Meek Robertson against Terry McLaurin, well, my goodness, what he did against Justin Jefferson, I'm all for that.
And
Like
that's
let's
what I was
sign
going
me
to
up
ask.
for
Who
that.
do you
Yeah,
think he puts on McLaurin? Because that's obviously going to be the highest
yeah.
profile assignment of the evening between the two squads.
Ride the hot hand. Yeah, I'd go back to Meek Robertson. He did an awesome job moving outside the slot to the outside. So I'd continue to do that, until proven otherwise. You'll get a little bit more assistance from the safeties. Brian Branch can play a little bit more in the slot, probably, roll a couple of other guys out there to assist. But that's what I would do at this point. Yeah.
So, from a game management standpoint, we know that the Lions love to go for it on fourth down more than just about any team in the NFL. When you compare it to other teams, I don't think they led the NFL this season. And I think it's partially because they were able to win on first and second down so much that they weren't
Hmm.
really in those got to have it fourth downs like they were a year ago or 2 years ago. But the Commanders are sneaky as it pertains to going for it on fourth down with frequency. I think 23 times they've gone for it on fourth down this season. But here's the thing, Phil, out of those 23 attempts on fourth down, they've converted 20 of those. So, in case you're a math wizard, that's 87% success rate on fourth down. These got to have it situations. So, keeping that in the back of your mind, Phil, that's a huge advantage to go into a game as an underdog, knowing that Cliff Kingsbury has the uncanny ability to draw up these high percentage fourth down, gotta have it plays. So that kind of goes to show you're almost never truly off the field against this team on defense until you're actually headed off to the sidelines.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought his name up because you know, he got chased out of Arizona. It just didn't work there as a head coach. But as a play caller, I think what he's been able to do with Jaden Daniels has been phenomenal, and he knows he's moxie enough that he's got his sheet of calls that he really, really likes in fourth down situations, and they've been able to execute on them. So that is something that we have to go ahead and kind of factor in and just kind of see how you're going to go ahead and guard against that. So um, it really is going to be interesting to see. Hopefully, we don't get into that situation where it is a shootout and it is going to be, hey, give me your best on fourth down versus my team's best on fourth down, and it's just a trade off, each time with it because you don't want to get into that. Even though we are pretty comfortable, I would say at this point, with Dan Campbell going forward on fourth down. So that is a great stat right there, and something that I'm glad you were able to dig up and kind of bring to our listeners.
So let's kind of attack this from a scouting report standpoint here. So when the Lions have the ball, what are we to expect? That's both what you see from the Lions offense and the Commanders defense.
Well,
Go as in depth or as nerdy as you want to be on this.
yeah. I mean, I think you beat this team by running the ball. I think you want this game to be on your terms. Let the defense and the crowd take over when the Commanders have the ball. But I will say, I'm not entirely sure if running the ball on the first series is going to be what's going to win you the game. I think you have to have some explosive plays on that first series to kind of just get out and make sure, kind of battling off if there is any little bit of rust right there. Um, to make sure at the end of that first drive that you can go get points. Go ahead and put the Commanders in a corner, make them play from behind. If the Commanders get the ball first, the place is going to be bumping. I not so sure that the Commanders should be able to go down and score, on the first drive with how loud it will be in there. So, um, again, this is all about trying to play the game on your terms. You're having David Montgomery back. I think this is a massive piece of it. I'm not entirely sure snap count wise where he'll be at, if he's even at 90%. But I know when it comes down to it, even at 90%, David Montgomery's 90% is better than most people's 150%. That dude is going to give you everything he has. And if you need a third and short, you have that. The red zone offense that the Lions had really hasn't missed too much of a beat those last couple of games of the regular season. It's going to be that much better with the ability to have David Montgomery go ahead and pick up when you've got, uh, a third and 5 from the 7-yard line, and you're not in quite a first and goal situation where you have to move the sticks. You have to get a little bit more time off the clock. Those are the ways that you're going to win this game and that you're going to advance to the championship game, in my opinion.
Yes, let's flip it around a little bit. You kind of previewed it with your thoughts on David Montgomery, but when the
Yeah.
Lions have the ball and the Commanders are on defense, what are you looking to see? Because statistically, the pass defense that we are going to see rather from the Commanders is not one of the stronger units that we've seen over the course of the season. So are you looking for your typical hand it off to Sonic and Knuckles, or are you looking for the Lions to be maybe a little bit more dynamic in the passing game to maybe take advantage of mismatches?
I think a guy like Jameson Williams, I think he can probably have some big explosive plays. I'd like to set the tone a little bit early with him. And then, hey, maybe if you can get out to a 7-0 lead, that is when you start getting Gibbs and Montgomery and the Sonic and Knuckles, impact that they can bring to the game. Let them take it over there. Play a little bit more ball control. Get the ball out of Jane and Daniel's hand and the Commanders' offense, and let them just be on the bench. Don't let them back on the field. So that's kind of what we're seeing. So, the Commanders' defense, I'm not sure. Like, I think their defensive line is still pretty solid for what they've got. They've got all those old Alabama guys that are down there.
Even
Dan
though
Quinn's
Deron Payne's only got 9 fingers right this minute.
that's a scary stat. But I think Dan Quinn is a very solid defensive play caller. I'm sure he'll scheme some things up to try to get some pressure on Jared Goff when it comes to the passing game. But there's no doubt in my mind that if we are rolling, it's going to be because our offensive line has established dominance. We've been able to get some solid carries from Gibbs and Montgomery, and we're playing with a lead. That's how we win this game.
So, real quick, I do want to touch on the injuries of note. So, obviously, it's looking like David Montgomery will play in Saturday's game. From Dan Campbell's comments from the other day, it sounds like maybe we need to temper our expectations a little bit, that I don't think Montgomery is going to get 25, 30 touches in the game. I think his exact verbiage was that he's going to have a role in this game. That kind of makes it sound like he's not going to be the guy. It's still going to be probably more Gibbs in the run game than anything else. We'll see Montgomery in probably some certain packages and certain looks and whatnot, but he probably won't be what we would typically come to expect out of him, which is, I guess, reasonable. It sounds like Zeitler should be good to go. It sounds like Terrion Arnold should be good to go. It sounds like Pat O'Connor may be a little bit less optimistic that we'll see him on Saturday. We'll have to wait and see once practice reports start coming out Wednesday, Thursday, and what have you, to kind of wait and see what we're looking at from that standpoint. But it sounds like the Lions are going to get probably as healthy as they're going to get for this game against the Commanders the whole rest of the way. I don't think anybody else, even Hutchinson, I'd still be pretty stunned if he were to make it back for a possible Super Bowl. But it sounds like the guys who we're going to be getting back for the Commanders game is probably as good as it's going to get from a health standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, and at this point in the year, there's what a month left, basically, until we're all done with this thing, anyways. So, um, you got to play with what you got. I feel very confident at the end of the day. That the Lions, from a personnel standpoint, have the talent to go get this done, even if some of these guys aren't going to be 100%. It's all about having the willpower at this point, playing smart football, taking care of the football, and executing on what you're good at and what got you here. And in my opinion, that is that power football, and it's the red zone offense, and just making sure we are getting touchdowns instead of field goals. You do that, you're going to be fine.
And obviously, what that equates to is seeing more of a Dan Gamble, let's go for it on fourth down, as opposed to settling field goals. Because if you're up maybe 14-7, and you have a chance to extend the lead to 2 scores, make it 17-7, or you have a chance to maybe go for a perceived kill shot, go up 21-7. You got to think he's going to be thinking, hey, we got to be able to try and maximize the amount of points we're going to put on the board at every turn. And who knows, maybe that could backfire, but that's what he's been doing all season long. So why would he change now?
Yeah, you wouldn't expect it to change now. And that's been our MO. That's how we've beaten teams before. And I wouldn't be shocked if we get in the situation again. We're trying to do it Saturday. Yeah.
You're listening to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progard chopping up with Phil Byrne ahead of the Commanders and the Lions. Saturday night on Fox. Kevin Burkhardt and Tom Brady on the call. We've had them a couple of times this year, and I think the Lions are a perfect 2 for 2 when the Fox A team happens to call one of our games. So no real issues with that. We'll have to listen to Greg Olson and his Sam Laporta pronunciation, among other things. So that's what we have for the upcoming game. Another thing that we found out about for the upcoming game against the Commanders that I want to discuss is the officiating crew. So, Phil, it's been determined that the NFL has assigned Ron Torbert to be the head referee for this weekend's game against the Commanders. Now, if that doesn't sound like a super familiar name, that's because it's not. Torbert did not work any Lions games whatsoever in 2024. Come to think of it, he didn't even call any Lions games back in 2023. You've got to go all the way back to the Vikings game at Ford Field in the year 2022, which is the last time that Ron Torbert officiated one of the Lions games. Now, that was a Lions victory, mind you.
Yeah.
But it's been
Last
quite a
second
while
victory.
since. That's right. So we've seen him very sparingly over the years, but this is what we get. Now, I kind of nerded out and went down the rabbit hole a little bit as far as what to expect from Torbert and the guys that are going to be out there. So bear with me while I kind of fire off a few little nuggets at you. So this crew, as it is in the playoffs, it's not one guy's crew like it is over the course of the regular season. It's kind of like a by committee or like an all-star type crew to where you've plucked different guys from different crews and they're all going to work together as one team. So you have part of Ron Torbert's crew, you got some guys from Sean Hockley's crew, and you got some guys from Brad Allen's crew, which that alone right there makes me just shiver. I went up my back as far as that goes. But here's what we're looking at. So this crew calls about 54% of the time, so above average calls against the offense. So for teams that, like the Commanders or the Lions, who are probably more offensively driven as opposed to defensively, that's something to be mindful of right there off the cuff. What to look for. Ron Torbert ranks number 1 in the NFL out of all referees for calling ineligible man downfield.
Mm.
He is second out of all referees for calling offensive pass interference. And he is fourth out of all referees calling offensive holding. So what's unique about all three of those? All three of those calls are drive killers. If you're unlucky enough to be hit with one of those, that's really going to put you behind schedule and really start to take you out of any type of real flow and really force you to maybe need to gotta have it with some of those downfield trick plays or bombs downfield or whatever the case may be, trying to play catch up and pick up yards in a hurry. As far as the Lions, they have been flagged for only 41% of flags against the offense. So compared to the rest of the league, that's in the upper half of the league. So that's a good thing. The Lions offense traditionally does not get flagged for very many calls on offense. They are the best in the NFL at offensive pre-snap penalties. So your false starts and your illegal formations and all this other stuff. They are the best in football when it comes to that stuff. So that's good. Even still, you've got guys from 3 different crews that are going to be monitoring the line of scrimmage. So even though one guy may call the pre-snap stuff a little bit less than the other, it's still something that the Lions got to bring their A game as far as being smart when it comes to the pre-snap stuff. From a defensive standpoint, the Lions rank second in the NFL for most defensive pass interferences called against them. Who's the only team that's worse than that? The Commanders. So I think we can expect a lot of pass interference flags, both offensive and defense, even though it seems like from what I could tell in the wild card round, the officiating crews that we got over this past weekend kind of seemed to want to let them play a little bit when there was a little bit of iffy contact. So I would like to hope that something like that would continue. You don't want a situation where you're getting a flag every play or every other play or something, because that's just going to disrupt the flow of the game, and that's just not fun to watch. The Lions defense has given up more automatic first downs via penalty than any other team in the NFL. The Commanders aren't too much better than that. They are at number 5 in the NFL. So both of those are some things to be concerned about. One bright spot, the Lions only got automatic first downs on third downs just 23% of the time, compared to 45% with the Commanders. So it's one of those situations where, hey, mentally you're thinking, hey, we're off the field, third down, just kidding, automatic first down. Those are tough. So those will be just something you just want to avoid those altogether. When Ron Torbert calls playoff games, and he's done a Super Bowl as well, home teams are 6-3 straight up. So that's something, okay, that's good. And the favorites were 13-3 against the spread with Torbert in 2024, the second best record to the favorites in the NFL. The Lions, of course, opened up as 8.5-point favorites. It is also worth noting that Ron Torbert is a graduate of Michigan State University. I'm not saying that's going to come into play anything at all, but Phil Byrne, that's your deep dive into the officiating draw for this weekend.
Hey, and that's why you listen to the podcast. That's why you listen to this podcast this far into it, to get that deep dive. So my takeaways is we have to be careful with the holding penalties and such like that. You know, like we're not going to see it maybe all the time, but you know, he is favorable to calling, you know, those drive killers, as you imagined, right? So how will that impact the game? I think also just kind of from the home field side and being the favorite and things like that, it sounds like that's also going to be into our favor. So geographical biases notwithstanding, yeah, it doesn't sound like got too much to complain about, at least to this point, you know.
It's also worth noting, though, that Ron Torbert and his crew, threw the second most number of flags collectively out of any other crew. Cleet Blakeman's
Okay.
crew threw the
Yeah,
most.
of course.
Second most was Torbert at 237 flags over the course of a 18-week season. So they number one, or the highest amount of flags thrown in an NFL game this season was 24 in a game between the Bills and the Seahawks. Who was on the call for that one? Torbert. So we really want to make sure that we're at the top of our game from a mental standpoint. You're keeping focus on the little things, like how the on the replays, on the network replays, how they give like that 1 yard, they shade that 1 yard past the line of scrimmage. Like, we got to be thinking, hey, where am I on the field when I'm making contact, or where am I as an offensive lineman? How far downfield am I? It's just an extra thing you got to keep in the back of your mind that you can spend,
Yeah.
knowing that this information is all out there, knowing that, hey, I got a few days to work on this stuff to make sure that we're on the right side of things between the black and white stripe guys.
Without a doubt, you don't want to also be going up against the Zebras, that's for sure.
No doubt about it. Let's take a look at the NFL coaching carousel real quick before we get into our game picks. So as of the recording of this pod, we have one of the coaching positions filled. Not a huge surprise when the Patriots decided to part ways with Gerard Mayo after one season. We kind of had a feeling it was because they had Mike Vrabel as their one target. Obviously, Aaron Glenn had the same idea as we did because he withdrew his name from consideration for the Patriots job before he even went through an interview process. So it is going to be Mike Vrabel, the man up in Foxborough. Everything else is still open for business, and we also, since we last talked, we had the Raiders part ways with Antonio Pierce after one full season, and we also had the Cowboys mutually part ways with Mike McCarthy. So there are 6 openings still to be had, and we have Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn being hotly pursued by pretty much every team that's out there. Phil, do you have any type of lean on any of these jobs, whether it's to our 2 guys or other guys in particular? What are you kind of thinking as you're analyzing what's still up for grabs, who you think might be an ideal fit, or maybe a direction that you think these are going to swing?
Yeah, so obviously it's worth noting the Chicago Bears position is still open. At this point in time, it looks like Ryan Poles is still going to be the general manager there. So one of the big selling pieces for Ben Johnson is that he would like to coincide or kind of go into the position the same time as the general manager. So, we will see what happens. I would be very, very surprised if he ends up in Chicago. I think Aaron Glenn will not be going to Chicago as well. I think Aaron Glenn will be a shoo-in with the New Orleans Saints. I think he fits the culture. I think he is ready to go be a head coach. I don't know, when you look at that Vikings game tape, how you can get a defense any more prepared and execute than the way that he did it. It was truly a masterclass, and we will probably feel the impact at some point, next year, of not having a guy like that on our team, right? So everyone who, you know, through the early part of 2023, it was like, oh, I don't know if Aaron Glenn's the defensive coordinator, this, that, or the other. No, there was a reason he was in that position and was the defensive coordinator for day one under Dan Campbell, right? So that's kind of the way I'm leaning with it. I think the one that is kind of a little bit interesting with one of our guys is going to be Ben Johnson. With the Raiders, potentially, it looks like that is going to have a position that will also have a general manager opening as well. So I know there's been some kind of conversation with, well, how is this going to work with Tom Brady calling the game for Fox, being a minority owner for the Raiders, and potentially being able to comment on the air or even meeting with Ben Johnson, as this is going on or leading up to, or, what have you. So,
yeah, that's a
I'm
really
sure.
good point, because it sounds to me, based on what I've heard, that it's Tom Brady himself that has kind of been trying to dangle the carrot in front of
Yeah,
Ben Johnson to, hey, come on out to Vegas. And now you've got him calling the game. I mean, it's funny how, like, on College Game Day, they don't let Kirk Herbstreit make the
yeah,
pick for the game that he's
right.
calling. How ironic that, like, in the next breath, you've got Tom Brady calling the game featuring the guy who he's trying to hire to be the coach of the franchise that he partially owns.
Yeah, and I just don't know. I know Brady signed that massive deal. I think he's probably more excited about being an owner, than probably actually calling these games. I just don't know how much he's gonna
You
be
think
through
you
the
think
Super
he's going to be a
Bowl.
one and done from a broadcasting standpoint? You think he'll call the Super Bowl and then kind of ride off into the ownership box?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, it's not a money standpoint with him, so that's kind of the way they're going. Obviously, you turn on ESPN and you're going to be inundated with the Dallas Cowboys one, especially have news broke today that, apparently they're going to be meeting with Deion Sanders to discuss that. So,
Which they have to. I mean, at least
yeah,
have the conversation and see what comes of it. But
yeah,
I think the Ben Johnson to the I was thinking Johnson to the Jaguars a week ago probably made the most sense.
sure.
I think
Yeah.
it's kind of odd that Balky is still there, and I think that may be one thing that kind of makes him think twice a little bit. Whereas with the Raiders, you kind of have the clean slate, but there's no clear cut path to a quarterback. You're not picking in the top five. You don't have a quarterback on your roster that excites anybody or moves the needle. So that might be the one thing that gives Ben Johnson a little bit of hesitation from the Raiders standpoint. And that's if
Eh,
he even wants to leave the Lions right now. Maybe he wants one more go around to see what happens and if he likes any of the head coaching jobs that come up next year a little bit better or something. I don't know. I'm not in his head and can't make that call. I do think Aaron Glenn is a goner as it
Yeah.
comes, down to the stretch for the Lions. Whether it's going to be the Saints or the Jets, I'm not sure. I think the Jets have more dysfunction from a ownership and front office standpoint. I think Woody Johnson's kind of a wild card, to say the least, whereas I think you have much more of a patient ownership group led by Mrs. Benson in New Orleans. However, almost maybe to a fault because it seems like Mickey Loomis has been their GM for umpteen thousand years.
Because the
And they've
Bush
got,
administration.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they got some salary cap issues to deal with down there. So I don't think either scenario, whether it's the Saints or the Jets, is going to result in a rapid turnaround and no growing pains of any kind. I think he's going to be up against it in a few areas, but I do think that he will be a head coach after the Lions complete their season at whatever point in time that may be. But we'll
Yeah.
have to see. The
Yep.
NFL carousel is a thing year in and year out and always has a lot of good stories on the back end. All right, Phil, picks for the wild card round. It was pretty good by both of us. I went a perfect 6-0 for the first time all season. I picked a perfect slate of games, so I will take it. You were one game behind me because
Yeah.
you and I were neck and neck the whole way until we got to the Chargers and Texans game, and we split in different directions there. So let's look at this weekend. First of all, on Saturday, wouldn't you know it, the Saturday 4:30 time slot, it's the Houston Texans traveling
Telling
to
you,
face the Kansas City Chiefs. Phil, do I even need to ask you what side you're on this one?
it's the Chiefs. But you did. So there's my
Yep.
answer.
There we go. We'll get to the second game last. We'll jump right to the afternoon game on Thursday. The LA Rams traveling out to play the Philadelphia Eagles in kind of an interesting game for the Eagles, a game that it looked like they had a lot more of a struggle to put away a pretty battered and beat Packers team. You even have A.J. Brown reading books over there on the sideline because apparently that's just what he likes to do during games. Who else doesn't like to pick up a book and read while his team is actively playing? Phil, Rams at Eagles. Who you got?
I really like the Rams, but I really like the Eagles defense. And I think they have enough on that defense to give some kind of tough matchups to Puka and Cooper Cup. And I think it will be a close game. I think this will be maybe the closest game of the divisional round here. But I'm going to go ahead and trust my gut on this one, go with the home team, and I'm going to go with the Philadelphia Eagles.
I am going to disagree with you, Phil. I am very impressed with what I'm seeing from the Rams on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that if you have two defenses that are playing both at a high level, which we're seeing, I think goes without saying, Vic Fangio has done a phenomenal job with the defense up in Philadelphia and has really made them a more well-rounded
Yeah.
unit because obviously they've had some good offensive play this last handful of years. The defense has really become a force, but I think you can say the same about the Rams. They have really, really been impressive over this back half of the year on defense. And it looks like Jalen Hurts is not quite himself still. It doesn't look like he's on the same page with A.J. Brown. It doesn't look like Saquon Barkley is going to be able to run for 250 or 300 yards against this Rams defense. I'm seeing a little bit more struggle from the Eagles offense than I am from the Rams offense. It's going to be a close one. It's going to be like a 19-17 type game, but give me the Rams to pull off the upset and go to the NFC Championship game. Next game up, you have the 3 seed in the AFC, Baltimore Ravens, traveling out with the 2 seed Buffalo Bills. A game that probably looks to have a lot of points scored in this game, so probably a defensive struggle in the first game, more offensive firepower in the second game. Who are you picking in this one?
So this is still the toughest call, and I think this is going to be a dogfight. Because you have two quarterbacks that are really trying to get over the hump. They want to be able to be the team that takes down Mahomes and the Chiefs in the AFC. When push comes to shove, I just happen to like the Ravens' balance a little bit more. I think they have more explosive play capability, but man, do I love Josh Allen. And man, do I think there is something special that we have seen with the Buffalo Bills this year. So I, again, am going to go with the home team, and I am going to go with the Buffalo Bills.
And see, Phil, we're going to be on opposite sides again. I think that both teams are up against narratives that do not work out in their favor, and that's that neither Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson are playoff quarterbacks. So it's up to these guys to eventually shake that narrative. And I think that Lamar's kind of been on a little bit of a personal revenge tour. I know they slipped up a few times. They lost to the Browns, they lost to the Steelers, they got beat up by Philadelphia at one point, but they've really turned the corner and played some good football. I do think Josh Allen has done more with less, whereas the Ravens have a little bit more around Lamar Jackson they have in years past. But I think that with Derrick Henry, they have the ability to really grind out possessions, keep that Buffalo defense on the field. And at the same time, we've seen some big improvement from the Ravens defense. They couldn't stop anybody in the passing game the first half of the season. They've really buckled down to become almost a top half of the NFL unit on defense once again. And I like the Ravens to move on to the NFC Championship game, or excuse me, the AFC Championship game to play the Chiefs on championship weekend. Last game, Phil, it's the Commanders at the Lions. The Lions are 8.5-point favorites. Tell me what you're thinking about this game.
Give me the Commanders. No. Wouldn't that be the swerve? Hey, we go on this whole podcast and we just be like, oh, yeah. No, 8.5. I guess if we're going on the line point, that is still a pretty sizable, point spread with this. I think if this is a lower scoring game, it is in the Lions' benefit. I don't think you want to get into a shootout with a team that looked and felt like a team that was ready for the moment, that was kind of maybe playing in shoes that they weren't quite sure how it was going to fit, but it felt good for them. Dan Quinn's a hell of a coach. So I think, again, we got to go back to the smash mouth. We got to go back to the power, mix in with some explosives when you can. Give me the Lions. I think we can go ahead and cover that 8.5. I'll say it's about a 10-point victory. And I think we win going away in the fourth quarter.
This is going to have to be a game where the Lions jump out to an early lead,
Yeah.
play from ahead, run the ball, avoid turnovers, and force the officials to keep the penalty flags in their pocket. If you're able to do that and you're able to get out to a lead and start playing from ahead and starting to grind out possessions, then you're going to force Jaden Daniels to become one-dimensional, and they're going to start pressing a little bit, and at that point you're able to keep the Ford Field crowd in. I know it sounds basic and elementary and say, oh, well, Vince, that can apply to any game whatsoever. I think it's especially important with a mobile quarterback like this, a young quarterback. I hate to even call him a rookie at this point, a young quarterback. But we also know that he is capable of, once he gets outside that pocket, making some things happen, kind of like what we saw from Josh Allen about a month ago. I'm not comparing him to Josh Allen, but he has the tools to be a very, very big problem in this league as a quarterback to defend. As I said, one of the scariest things in sports is a team coming into your house with absolutely nothing to lose, and that is the case with the Commanders. They're obviously ahead of schedule here, and if they wind up continuing to build this roster, they're going to be in these types of games for years to come. I think it's going to be tighter than the 8.5. I don't know why I have this feeling. I just think that the Lions are going to have a little bit of a hard time in actual practice. Maybe in theory they'll draw some things up, and in practice, keeping the Commanders' keeping the Commanders' offense at a nice enough clip. I still take the Lions to win this game. I do think it's going to be a closer game that they're going to kind of have to grind out, and we're all going to be sweating a little bit in the fourth quarter. But, hey, maybe that'll give us a little bit more battle test heading into NFC Championship weekend. We'll have to see.
Exactly. Yeah, that sounds good to me. And forward down the field, let's have a wonderful Saturday night football in Motor City, and it's going to be an awesome scene. I will be at this game, Vince. I did not sell my ticket. I will be at the game. I will give you that first person account. So if you're listening, I'll be able to get that for our next episode here.
All right, Kneecaps Nation, whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're going to the game or listening to the game or watching the game or can barely watch because you're just nervous as all get out, we hope that you enjoy however you will be spending the 3.5 hours during the Commanders-Lions game. We're hoping it's going to be a Lions win, and we hope to have you back here next week as we break down the aftermath of Commanders-Lions. Playoffs are here, baby. Forward down the field. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning. Go Lions. Forward down the field once again. Over and out.